and welcome back to the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. I'm Raffi, joined by Davian. Davian, we are in the thick of it, and not the KSI thick of it, just the thick of the off season, where there's not much NHL, NBA stuff going on anymore. NFL, there was some stuff, but right now it's pretty much dead, at least for the next week or two until we get to the preseason. MLB trade deadline did happen, but neither of us are currently competent enough to talk about that, so that's a next week problem where we'll educate ourselves on the MLB trade deadline and have a more impactful discussion on that. So today it's kind of just going to be a free for all. We're kind of just going to be going back in time, going a little into our UNC statuses and digging out some of the archives of some of our favorite or most memorable sports memories. But before we do that and go down memory lane, David, how are you? I see that you are trying to bring out a very bad memory for my sports fandom, but how are you?
I'm doing great, Rafi, because today we get to talk about our favorite sports memories. It's a special edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast in a way. I can be more excited because some of my favorite memories are Rafi's worst memories. And there's nothing like reliving them and seeing Rafi's reaction. In any case, though, Rafi, I'm doing great. F1 seasons also happening right now, and I've been kind of tapped into that. So I mean, we saw McLaren just absolutely wipe the floor today at the Belgian Grand Prix. WNBA has been going on, and they're demanding to get paid more, which honestly I could see why, because the WNBA has been bringing in a lot more revenue, and even though it's still operating at a loss, that money just is not coming to the players, that revenue. So there's that. Besides that, there's not really just not that much news. We covered a lot of it in last week's podcast when we talked about the NFL and things happening there. MLB, I mean, trade deadlines happening, like as you mentioned, Rafi. NBA, I mean, there's it's the summer league, guys. Like, we're not gonna cover that. Respectfully, though. So yeah, I've been great, Rafi. Rafi, what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, not much. Working on cooking up a couple of scripts for some NHL off-season videos, so that'll start to go up. Hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, start to get into the recording booth, and by recording booth, I mean the same exact spot that I sit in for every podcast. So we'll get into those in the coming weeks, just so there's at least some other more hockey based and just in general some more videos coming out. So which teams did really well in the off season, grading teams off seasons, maybe a little talk about the Blackhawks prospect pool. So we'll get into some more hockey stuff as we get through the off season, and then as I mentioned previously, in a couple of weeks it'll be football season, college football season. So we'll have plenty to discuss shortly. But going back into the main topic of the day, and the topic of today's podcast is some of our most memorable sports memories. Yes, this is how far deep into the offseason we are, where we're pulling something like this out of the bag. Davian, I'll hand it off to you first, and try not to hurt me too much, but what is one of your most memorable sports memories?
So let's go back to the first time not the first time I watched football, but my first real big memory of football. I remember, of course, watching all the Super Bowls as a kid, but I never really got into it. For context, my dad, usually I feel like you grow into a sport because of your dad. My dad's never been a big football fan. I kind of got him more into it, but in any case, my uncle, though, huge Patriots fan. And this was my first time ever really watching a Patriots game per se. That's a lie. Like, I definitely watched, Super Bowl 11, the Super Bowl in 2011, and 2007 that were unfortunate. But being around a lot of Giants fans in Jersey, it was a whole lot of fun at the same time. But in any case, though, the point is, I was watching the Ravens against the Patriots divisional round game where Julian Edelman uh, throws that touchdown to, I believe it was Danny Amendola, which definitely I felt in many ways turned the tides of that game. And so that's always going to be a favorite memory of mine, and one of the reasons why I absolutely love Julian Edelman. And that, I think, that memory just kind of shows also just the Patriots, their unique play style and their ability really to master plays like that, and do things that you wouldn't have ever seen before. And many teams have tried to replicate that. Some have successfully, some haven't. Odell Beckham has, thrown, his fair share of passes when he was on the Giants as well, I remember. But in any case, though, that's a favorite memory of mine. Rafi, what about you?
Yeah, one of my most notable sports moments, and this kind of my number one, just because the reason why I am speaking to you and the reason why I'm speaking to our 49 subscribers, here's why we have this podcast, here's why I make all these videos, all started back in 2010, and most notably, Patrick Canes were an overtime winner to win the Blackhawks their first Stanley Cup in 49 years. And this is obviously a very notable moment. Also, just personally as well, I know a lot of these sports moments, they're memorable for not only the moment itself, but also just what was going on in people's personal lives. And this was the first earliest memory that I have of moving in to my family's new house. We were living in another area of Chicago. We moved to this new house where I'm currently recording this video, and we did this summer of 2010. So this was, I believe, a week or two into moving into this new house, and this was a moment that obviously was something that I really tie to this house. And just as I've grown up, this has kind of been the first memory I have of this house. And Patrick Kane scoring that overtime winner in Game 6. I remember being in second grade. Yes, Stephen, I was in second grade back in 2010. I know it's a foreign concept for you to be in grade school at that point, but yes, I was in second grade, and I just remember all my friends and all these kids in school were talking about, oh my gosh, the Blackhawks, the Blackhawks, the Blackhawks. I wasn't too big into hockey. I was kind of getting into sports. I had done soccer, baseball in the past, just t-ball and soccer, just in my little soccer leagues, etc. But wasn't really paying too much attention to hockey. But everyone kept talking about the Blackhawks. I'm like, okay, I'll talk. I'll follow the herd. I'll get peer pressured into paying attention to hockey, and it really roped me in. And this is a story that I'm sure Quinn can relate to, and other people who are from the Chicagoland area. The Blackhawks dynasty was a big reason for why so many people our age are so big into hockey in the Chicagoland area, and largely due to the Blackhawks winning the Stanley Cup. So Patrick Kane scoring his overtime winner in 2010. That's why he's my favorite player in all sports, one of my favorite people, and obviously a big reason why I got into hockey, big reason why I got into doing broadcasting, sportscasting, and another reason why it eventually led to me doing this podcast where I'm talking to you and you're going to hurt me shortly. So just know that all this is set up to where you have the opportunity now to hurt me. So it's been 15 years in the making, this moment where Patrick Kane scores his overtime winner, and now we're at this point in time now where you're about to crush my feelings in a very inhumane way. So, Davian, do you have any other notable sports memories?
I do. I have so many. But before I get to the obvious one, the Minnesota Miracle. That was a core memory of mine. I do not promote gambling. We do not promote gambling to any extent. But this was like my first time ever making sports bets. It was just with a friend. We were betting like $5, $10, and it was the first time I placed a bet. And I bet like $5 again with my friend on the Vikings winning. And I remember I wasn't really watching the game a whole lot. I had it on. I was at my grandparents' house, and I had it on though in the office. And then there's like a main room where I was really hanging out with my grandparents. And then I remember that I saw like it was getting within the 2 minute warning, so I was like, okay, let me go check out this game and see what's happening. And I was like, oh wow, this game is so close. And then then you see Case Keenum and you see like the Vikings have the ball and they could drive down the field and score, tied up with a field goal. And I was like, wow, like this is intense. And I'll never forget that that throw, the catch, the missed tackle, and seeing Stephon Diggs just throw his helmet. I just started running around this tiny Brooklyn apartment, absolutely celebrating my mind and going crazy because that was just wow, what a memory that was. Just truly, truly unforgettable memory.
Yeah, that was such a great call as well. Diggs sideline touchdown. It's just one of
Yeah,
those core broadcasting calls too that you just can never forget. It's just engraved in your mind. I remember that game too. That was an absolutely beautiful game. Now, I don't think Minnesota Vikings fans want to talk about anything that happened after that game and that NFC Championship game versus the Eagles, but that whole playoffs was full
yeah.
of very, very
I don't
memorable
really want to talk
moments,
about the
and
game after
obviously it
that,
didn't
which was
end
the
the
Super Bowl
best way for
either.
you, Davian, as a Patriots fan, but it was still a really good Super Bowl that was filled with many iconic moments. So overall, that Super Bowl, those playoffs in general had so many great moments, and
It
Diggs'
really did.
sideline touchdown is definitely one of them. I'll get into another one, and this one is quite random, but again, you
Okay.
mentioned you're a little gambling fan, and as we mentioned before, we don't condone gambling to any extent. You will never see a gambling ad on this podcast, even if
Yeah.
it gets really, really big. And Colts Texans in 2013 was a very, and still is a very notable game in my life. And David, this is why. T.Y. Hilton, 3 touchdowns, 121 yards, and this was just an insane game because back in the day, I was 11 years old. I was 11 years old, and I was doing fantasy football. I believe this was my first year doing fantasy football. It was my first or second year doing fantasy football, and I was in this league with a lot of my friends who were in grade school with me, obviously. And this game that I was in, this matchup that I was in, it was essentially over. I was like, okay, well, I'm down by 20. All I have is T.Y. Hilton left. He's playing Sunday Night Football. And I'm watching the game with my dad, and it's like 8 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm going to go to sleep because I had strict parents. I was going to bed early, and I was going to wind up waking up at 7 a.m., a practice that I still wind up doing today, although now I'm allowed to thankfully sleep a little later now on my own accord, if that wasn't clear enough. But so I go to bed, and I'm down 20. My dad and I are like, okay, whatever. The game's over. It was a good try this week. Whatever. I wake up, and T.Y. Hilton in late in the third and in the fourth quarter has 3 touchdowns, winds up finishing with 121 yards, caught a 58-yard bomb in the fourth quarter as the Colts beat the Texans 27-24. This was enough for me to beat one of my friends by 2 points in our fantasy football matchup. I
Woof.
normally did not run into this guy often. I ran into this guy 4 times that day. Every single time, he just seemed more and more angry to run into me because he was so unhappy that T.Y. Hilton in the fourth quarter put up essentially 27 points for me to win that game. So that's just a random game that has no influence on anything. I didn't want to win that fantasy league either, but it was just a core memory too because my dad and I are just like, okay, well the game's over, whatever, it's fine. I went to bed, wake up the next day, find out I won before I go to school. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I can't believe T.Y. Hilton just did this. And I run into this guy 4 times that day as well. Normally I'd run into him maybe once a day, maybe at least a couple times during the week. But I ran into that guy 4 times that next day on Monday, and it was so funny to see his face. It was a very core memory in the beginning of my love for fantasy football. So very random game. I saw your face immediately. You're like, how does Colts Texans 2013 in the regular season have any? Where is he
Yeah,
going with this?
you
But
had me
that
confused.
was a insane. That was one of the greatest fantasy football wins that I've had, and that was 12
Yeah.
years ago, which is just insane to think about.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I mean, you talk about the Colts, and this isn't like a memory per se. I don't exactly remember what game it was, but I remember it was one of the final weeks. It was like a championship weekend, and I was down by a lot. And the only one person I had left, it was Sunday Night Football as well, was Marlon Mack. I don't know, Raffi, if you remember that name from the fantasy football days,
Colts
but
legend Marlon Mack.
man, absolute legend. And this one game, he just goes absolutely off. Like scores, I think at least like 25 points, fantasy football points, and gets me the win. I was so ecstatic being that I changed. I used to run for context, guys. I still have this Instagram page called NFL.expert that I don't really run anymore. But at the time, I was still running it. I changed my profile picture to have it with Marlon Mack because of how much of a fan I became of his. I DM'd Marlon Mack that night saying, "Thank you so much for putting up an insane performance." Man, that was a time. Yeah, I remember there's like a few games, Rafi. I mean, the beauty about fantasy football is that it just makes you get involved in so many random games. Like you said, the 2013 Colts Texans. That's not a game that anybody really cares about or watches unless you're really a Colts or Texans fan, or you're a fan of another AFC South team and you want to see both teams absolutely suck. But point being though is that it was just like seeing those games where you win by like 0.06, 1 point. Remember there's one game, one fantasy football matchup, I won by like 0.06 because Sterling Shepard had like an extra catch and it was like a garbage time like play and he caught the ball and whatever. It was like 6 yard gain. And I remember that I was just like ecstatic over it and just going ballistic. It was a Sunday night, of course. And my parents were like, "What are you like? Why are you yelling?" I'm like, "I just won because of this garbage time play." It's things like that that really bring back just core memories. Rob, is there any like other World
100%.
Cup memories you had or anything like that? Kind of like on a national level in a way. Any games that you remember
Yeah,
that you really loved?
nationally speaking, I mean, the easy slam dunk for me, obviously, is a Chicago win, is the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016. I remember that World Series
Right,
quite
of course.
vividly, especially because I thought I was the reincarnation of the curse because it felt like every single time I watched the World Series, the Cubs lost, and then
Mhm.
whenever I didn't watch, they won. I didn't watch games 5 and 6 because I thought I was cursing the team, in which they further proved their point, where I did not watch both games and then wound up winning. And I was very conflicted before Game
Yeah.
7. I was like, do I watch this game? Do I not watch this game? I don't really know what to do. In which I decided, you know what, I am going to watch this game. To my DeGrin maybe is the word. I don't know. To my utter shock, the Cubs wind up blowing it. I was like, oh my gosh, I am the curse. I am exactly why the Cubs are going to lose the World Series now. Obviously, there's the rain delay. There's the greatest speech of all time, and then the Cubs win in, I believe it was the 10th inning, and it was Ben Zobrist, Mike King, what a guy, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, all those guys. I love postseason baseball, and the Cubs being in the postseason, them winning the World Series was a core memory. I lucked out. I only had to wait 14 years, and half those years I didn't really care about baseball anyways. So I kind of got the inside track rather than having to wait 108 years for the Cubs to win the World Series. So that was unbelievable. I went to the World Series parade. My phone did die, so that was a little scary because I did not know how to get back to my parents' workplace. But that I think that was one of the largest crowds in the of any moment in United States history. It was one of the biggest gatherings of people ever in the
Wow.
United
That's
States because it was just so unheard. It was such a big moment for the city. I remember they won the World Series. I was freaking out. We went to Dick's Sporting Goods because I wanted to get a hat, and the shirt. But they were like, okay, like we don't have them yet. But there was a whole line outside the Dick's Sporting Goods, which was like 10 minutes from my house. Everyone was waiting, cheering, etc. And
right.
that whole thing, the parade, etc. It was absolute madness, and it was such a great time to be a Cubs fan. And I just remember going to my classes; everyone was going crazy. It was insane.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. New York hasn't really experienced a championship in a while, and not being from Boston, I've never been able to go to the Patriots parades. But a core memory of mine is I'm an MLS fan, so I love NYCFC, and I remember sitting with my dad watching them beat man, who was it? It was in the Seattle Sounders in the finals, and it was absolutely amazing. I mean, just being a part, like being a fan of that team, and when so many people doubted them and everything, and it was just really just like a core memory of mine, just like celebrating with my dad, and speaking on that family sense, another like core memory of mine. It's gonna be sound strange, so it's not like a very sports memory, but more so like kind of just like the experience of it. It was the J. It was Logan Paul against Floyd Mayweather boxing match. For some reason, I turned it on. I was gonna watch it with my friend. I bought the pay per view, which was only $25, and I was like, okay, that's worth it. Definitely wasn't. But in any case, I was sitting and I watched it with my dad and my grandpa, and just all three of us just bonding over sports is just like it's just a core memory of mine. So yeah, I mean, Rafi, you have any like memories like that as well, where it's like kind of just like just being with family, being with your dad, being with other family members or like really close friends and watching a game, and you're like, wow, like this is something I'll always remember.
Yeah, the big two that I can think of, and this is just because my dad was a Bruins fan, was the 2011 Stanley Cup Finals, Game 7. That whole playoffs was crazy for the
Yeah,
Boston Bruins. Game 7 versus Tampa Bay Lightning. Tim Thomas's big saves. Tim Thomas taking his goalie stick and whacking a guy to the ground. Also very iconic of Tim Thomas to do so. And in 2011, I remember Game 7. I just remember that entire series. So I remember the Bruins going down 2-0. I remember not Tuukka Rask, Tim Thomas storming off after allowing the overtime goal in game two to go down 2-0 in the series. And everyone thought, for the most part, it was the Bruins are cooked. Then I forgot who. I think it might have been Raffi Torres or Alex Burrows. One of those two guys. I don't like either of them for numerous reasons. One of them took out Marion Hossa. The other took out Nathan Horton. But anyways, one of them took out Nathan Horton, which essentially wound up being the end of his career. He really was never the same player after that hit. And the Boston Bruins wound up coming together, winning Game 3 at home, and then Game 4 blowing the heck out of Vancouver Canucks 8-2, or it was 8-1, 8-2. Regardless, that was one of my favorite games ever because as a Blackhawks fan, I really did not like the Vancouver Canucks because the Canucks beat the Blackhawks in 7 earlier on in the playoffs. Alec Burrows scoring the game winner in Game 7 to win 2-1, even though they almost blew a 3-0 lead to the Chicago Blackhawks. People forget that. But they wound up winning that series in the first round, unfortunately. And the Bruins wind up getting all the way to Game 7. They tie the series, as I mentioned, at 2 apiece. I forgot who won Game 5, Game 6, but it was Game 7. And watching with my dad, obviously big moment because my dad hasn't seen the Bruins win a Stanley Cup in a while. And he got to see that, which was nice. And I will never forget switching the channel from whatever we were using to watch that game. I forgot what it was on. Maybe it was NBC at that time, to ESPN to just see what they're talking about. And all I remember seeing on that TV is Vancouver burning the city to the ground. And that was just, that was so, no one was killed. So
Yeah,
that's
but that was
obviously the
definitely a
big,
crazy moment.
but it was so funny to watch
Yeah,
all the people of Vancouver literally have a whole full blown riot over
yeah,
losing Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. It was a core memory of mine. It was a hilarious moment, and that was hilarious. And then 2 years later, in 2013, Blackhawks played the Bruins, me versus my father, and there was one game, Game 3, I believe, which was on my birthday, and or no, it was Game 4. I believe it was Game 4, and the Bruins were up 2-1 in the series. The Blackhawks were playing awful in that game. I forgot how they're down like 5-2 or something, and it was my birthday too, so I was really upset because I was like, how could you possibly put on this performance on my birthday? And then, sure enough, Blackhawks come back. They win the game in overtime 6-5, which was just crazy. And
yeah.
obviously, the 17 seconds moment happens in Game 6. I was very excited. My dad did a good job of holding. He was like, okay, I'm happy for you. Obviously, it stung for him, but I'm his kid, so he was happy that at least I was happy. I remember throwing up the balloons I had. I was very happy about that. So that was another core memory. Just those two games, just for watching with my dad. So it's been nice. Unfortunately, we haven't had too many happy moments watching games together, just because the Blackhawks haven't been great. The Bruins most notably lost in 2019 in Game 7 in a rigged Stanley Cup Finals, but that's a tangent for another day. But yeah, those are definitely two really big moments that I at least look back on overall. Davian, a lot of my good positive sports memories kind of predate 2017. I haven't had too much to be happy about, but then again, if I was talking about some of these moments to a Maple Leafs fan or a Sabres fan or 90% of fans in any of the major four sports leagues, I'm pretty sure they all would envy all those moments. So I can at least be rest assured about that. And Connor Bedard will lead the Blackhawks to the Stanley Cup one day, which will provide me with another core memory whenever he wins his first and then his second and then 5 straight. So I have that at least to cling on to.
Yeah, no, I definitely kind of get that feeling. Like, I feel like even for myself, being a Patriots fan. I feel like a lot of my core memories are like come from like before 2020 in a way. But in any case, though, I feel like that as you get older, you start appreciating sports more in general. So you're able to celebrate like another team's win. You're able to root for someone like the OKC Thunder, or celebrate a team like even a team like the Blackhawks, like doing well. And I think that's the beauty of sports, being able to root for a team you're not really a big fan of. But trying to think of some other memories I had. I think watching the Olympics
And
has always been a core memory of mine. I don't really have per se like one Olympic memory. Um, I wasn't. I remember, TJ Oshie, the shootout goal. That's a core memory I'll never forget. In the was it the World Juniors? Am I right, Rafi? When I say that?
no, that was the Olympics in Sochi.
Olympics in
back
Sochi.
in
You're right.
2010.
Okay, that's what I thought it was, but I wasn't sure.
PJ Oshie
Oh,
was the only guy on the Blues who had my approval. Him and then Vladimir Tarasenko a few years later. Those were the only two players on the Blues that I would root for. Outside of that, no. I could not stand the St. Louis Blues. I still can't stand them. They're a bum organization. I don't like the city of St. Louis, and the reason why is because of them. It's also a boring city too. Sorry, sorry to our any St. Louis listeners. If you're listening to this podcast, this is an anti St. Louis podcast. I'm sorry. As a Chicagoan,
well, fair enough. You know, and I'm trying to think. Yeah, I guess getting into the meat grinder of it. Of course, a memory. One of my this is probably my favorite sports memory besides the Malcolm Butler interception against Seahawks. Super Bowl 51. I mean, uh, like definitely was upset for the first half up until the third quarter, and with two minutes, 3 minutes remaining, and then seeing the comeback and seeing and just watching it all while everyone else was just being the only one on the couch at the Super Bowl party that I was at, and just like having faith, having hope in your team, and seeing them come back and win, and then the Julian Edelman catch. Uh, Man, it's just I remember when that play happened. I was like, he caught it, he caught it, he caught it. And all my friends around me were like, no, he didn't. Like that hit off the ground, it bounced off the ground. I'm like, no, no, he caught it, he caught it. And when they showed that replay and it shows that he, the last second grabbed it before it hit the ground. Uh, and then, oh man, I won't forget Dante Hightower, boom tower, strip sack against Matt Ryan. Uh, that's really when you felt the momentum switch. I felt in that game, and the Edelman as well, because one thing as a Patriots fan is like you always get hit with these crazy catches. Being a Patriots fan, right? I remember the Julio Jones catch at Super Bowl as well. I'm like, this is another David Tyree helmet catch. This is another sideline catch. In the Giants, other Super Bowl win that they had. Or the man, what was that guy's name? The Seahawks player, was it Jermaine Kearse who caught that ball? I'm not exactly sure, but in any case, there's always these catches. There's always going against
Jacoby
Patriots.
Jones.
But having that one catch, yeah, you're right. You're right, Rafi. It was just absolutely an amazing feeling. Really can't express more.
Yeah, as someone on the opposite side of things, you might have been wondering, Rafi, were you really happy in the first half? No. I'd seen this story before with Tom Brady. I knew exactly what was coming. And that was arguably what made it worse. Was I just slowly just felt vindicated. I was like, I know he's coming back. I only spoke in hypotheticals. I didn't even mention but people were already ready to buy Falcon Super Bowl championship merch. I had not said a word about anything because I knew never doubt that man Tom Brady. I knew what was coming. I sat in awe as it actually did happen, and I was like, I'm not surprised by this, but it was just terrible. And then I remember seeing the touchdown, turning off the TV, and then just going to bed, and that was rough. But you win some, you lose some. I had the Cubs winning the World Series a couple months earlier, so I'd rather have the Cubs winning the World Series. We all know that my attachment to the Falcons is hit or miss. I will root for them. They are my NFL team if I have to choose an NFL team. But to be quite honest, I am a much bigger hockey fan and a bigger Cubs fan first before I really get too into the NFL. Other notable moments that I had before we close the show: LaShawn McCoy, snow game. Obviously, every time that I
Ooh,
pretend
what a pull,
that
Rafi.
every
Okay.
time I played football in the snow, I pretended I was LaShawn McCoy. I had LaShawn McCoy every single year in fantasy football throughout his entire career. At least one league of mine had LaShawn McCoy. Love that so much. Core memory because, again, fantasy football. Julio Jones, Matt Ryan, the reason why I got into the Falcons in the first place. Both of them were such a dynamic duo. I had both of them and LaShawn McCoy on my team back when Julio Jones was a rookie, I believe, the year I had all three of them. And that's what got me to the Falcons. Also, the Bears trading Matt Forte, Brandon Marshall, etc. rubbed me the wrong way. And then one of the biggest ones, Argentina France World Cup Final 2022. Genuinely think that might be the greatest sports game that I've ever watched. As much as I love hockey, as much as I have these other moments, Argentina France World Cup Final 2022. I don't think I hope that a game will wind up beating that, but that was such an insane game because you're like, okay, Well, this game's over. Argentina's up 2-0. It's 60, 70 minute. It looks like France hasn't generated too much this entire game. And Kylian Mbappe says, just wait. Watch me. Scores two goals within, I believe it was 3 or 4 minutes. It was absolutely insane. And then you have France almost won the game. I forgot if it was in extra time or if it was towards the end near the
Yep.
90th minute in stoppage time. But there was a beautiful chance for Argentina to win that game, for France to win the game, and winds up not going the way. Messi wins his World Cup. Yes, I am not thrilled that he went to Azerbaijan a couple months ago and met with the president of Azerbaijan, etc. But that's geopolitics. I won't get too much into that. But for the game itself, for everything that went on, for all the storylines, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. It was so much drama, so many great storylines, and for Argentina to win the World Cup, it was just an absolute masterful game. I don't. Whoever was a scriptwriter who wrote that game did an absolutely beautiful job with that game. It's got to be one of my favorite games I've ever watched.
Yeah, no, Rafi, that is a game that I clearly remember watching with my family, and the just absolute masterclass of play, and seeing Messi finally raise up that trophy and really solidify his goat status. And this is definitely a memory I won't forget. And similar to games, and we'll wrap up right after this. November 19th, 2018. Little Davian was sitting on his bed right behind me watching this game on this TV, playing it on like the most only like on one sound level, so I don't get caught. Sorry, mom or dad, if you're watching. Like, yeah, I did do that. I'm watching this Thursday night football game, and I'm like, because I always did. I had this thing where like that year, that 2018 season, 2018 2019 season, that I was gonna watch every single Sunday night football game and Thursday night football game. I was like dead set. I will watch every single game. And I'm watching this game and I'm like, wow, this is like, the first quarter, it's like pretty intense. And then you just turn into absolute bloodbath, third, fourth quarter. And it ended up being Rams won 54-51. Just the absolute play, like the offensive just prowess from both teams was just, I can't explain it. It was just absolutely insane and such a fun game to watch. In any case, Rafi, I feel like we could be here for hours and hours talking about our favorite memories, but I'll hand it back off to you, Rafi, to close this show down.
Yeah, and the great thing about sports too is if you just watch these games, you'll get so many more memories. I remember Alabama Georgia national championship a couple years ago. That was a great game. I remember watching Davis in the Iron Bowl versus Alabama. I remember seeing that play. That was insane. Who could forget some of the other notable moments that have occurred over time? I just had one that Four Nations face off where you had the Kachuk brothers just fight and drop the gloves immediately versus Canada in the Four Nations face off. Absolutely iconic stuff. That's going to be a core memory as well. So many great memories, and can't wait for what this upcoming sports calendar brings to us, just because it feels like every single year there's several sports memories that make the list, either for personal reasons, either for gambling dash fancy football reasons, just meaning for your team, etc. So there's so many great moments. So can't wait to see what the next year holds in terms of the sports calendar. Davian, it was great reliving some of our great memories, and one of my not great memories, but as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Let us know in the comments some of your great sports memories as well. We can have a little bit more of a conversation at some point back in the day when I was 8 years old in 2010. So let us know in the comments below what are some of your most notable sports memories. We'd love to read them in the comments below. For Davian, I'm Rafi. We hope you enjoyed this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. Have a good one, and we'll see you on the next one. See ya.
Peace.